I hope you find this talk interesting. It's an accumulation of things on the Chesapeake Bay. I'd like to find out a little bit about you, the audience. How many people here own a boat? Or have owned a boat? How many would like to own a boat? Most of the photographs are taken from the Chesapeake. You know, there are obviously going to be some shots of little towns and things happening on shore, but there are also a lot of photos taken on the water. So if you know, everybody's heard of the Chesapeake Bay and so forth, and they know it's there. I call it a local treasure because even though my talk originally started out to be a national treasure, which it is, it's local for us. And if you haven't been on the Chesapeake Bay, out on the water, you won't see a lot of the scenes that you'll see here in the photographs. So I thought, you know, when I put this thing together a few years ago, that it would be interesting for somebody who hasn't been on the water or hasn't seen the activity on the bay. And it's so close by, it's different from what you see around here in Phoenixville on what water you do have, right, as you go over the bridge. At any rate, this is mostly going to be photographs. I'm going to quit talking after the first couple, maybe. And we'll basically look at the photographs, and each one has a caption. And I've done some of them pretty straight-laced, and others I work a little tongue-in-cheek in. So you got to pay attention. Don't close your eyes, and no yawning. Okay? I don't want to be in your way, do I? Is that seat empty? That you know, you might have a better angle if I'm wandering over here. At any rate, can everybody hear okay? Okay, let's begin. That's the only chart that has a whirligig title to it. There's probably a reason for that, right? If any of you have been boat owners, you know that maritime law says that you're the captain of the ship. Everybody has to do what you say. Otherwise, you're either court-martialed or you walk the plank or some other such thing. But every captain has an admiral. She's in the back of the room. And the captain knows well enough that you don't leave port until the admiral gives you the aye, aye, sir. So with that, I'm going to launch into the talk. It is an estuary, which makes it unique. It's the largest one in North America, not just the United States, North America. So, as your little handout shows you, an estuary, in case you didn't know, an estuary is a meeting of fresh water and salt water coming in from the ocean. And of course, that line moves back and forth. So it does have a big ecological impact, you know, from a food standpoint, wildlife, and so forth. So it is unique. And I don't have a lot of time to go into a lot of details about it, but I took a couple of pages out of the chart book that's laying on a table up here to show you basically. It works here, but doesn't want to work here. Okay. At any rate, these are 2 pages from the chart book that will show you the bay proper. Okay, if I can stand in front of you for a minute. And this is what we call the upper bay, and this is the lower bay, all the way down to Norfolk. And I'm going to focus on the upper bay, which is basically where we had our trawler. The watershed area. How many people think you can guess the 6 states involved? How about that? Okay.
New York.
Good.
Pennsylvania.
Good.
Maryland.
Good.
West Virginia.
Good.
Virginia.
Good.
And did I say Maryland? And
You said
Delaware.
Delaware. Delaware, that's right. You passed. Okay. Some people would say, how about Jersey? Jersey doesn't drain into the Chesapeake. It's all on the other side of the rivers. There's 12,000 miles of shoreline, as you can see. A lot of seafood taken out annually. And it services in the area 18 million people. Well, at the time I put this chart together. And there's a ton of boats, 400,000 some odd boats, give or take, whatever the year registration is. So, as I mentioned, we're going to focus on the upper bay. And just because I wanted to do that, the things that I put dots and squares on. The 4 blue squares are bridges. The round dots, the big ones, are places that we frequented, and a couple of little red ones are smaller places. But those are areas on both the eastern shore, and then I picked 2 or 3 places over on the western shore because they're totally different as far as what you have for the townships, what's going on, the history, and so forth. So, the boat that was involved was a 39-foot mainship trawler. You know, it's a sleek boat, full galley. It has an upper bridge, which is where you do most of the piloting from up here, plus there's room for chairs. Obviously, inside has a living room and bedrooms and so forth. So, nice, fully equipped boat. Had a 300-horse Caterpillar engine, and so we would do about 8 or 9 knots typically. It was a sweet spot, but you could do as much as 10, 11, 12 knots, depending on the current and tide and so forth. So it was a good boat, and it was named, as you can see here, Capricorn. I'm a December baby, as is my admiral, so we named the boat Capricorn. That was one thing we could agree on. So, this was a shot when we brought the boat up from Florida and into the Chesapeake Bay. My son and his wife and newborn, 6 months old, happened to meet us down at the boat to give us a ride home, right? And she was a happy baby at that point. She's only 6 months old, roughly, in that picture. So that's why I call it future camp. And she happens to be with us tonight back here, smiling away, with her cougar shirt on. So, we kept the boat at a marina down at near Kent Island, in the middle of the Chesapeake upper. And this is our boat, second one in, lined up at the marina. It was a nice marina, close to things. So there are some shots close by Kent Island. In fact, if you were away out on the water and you wanted to get back to your marina and you're surrounded by water and landline, you know, a mile or 2 away, it's nice to have a landmark, and that lighthouse was the landmark for me. This is a little town called Graysonville, not very big, I don't know, a few hundred people maybe. But it's a pretty little spot, flat, because the waters are kind of inland there. In fact, you can actually do some thinking there. And there is an exploration center there. It's like a little museum, maritime oriented. There is a skipjack, which is an old oyster boat that's out front on display. And of course, because for a long time the bay was the livelihood for a lot of fishermen, so they do have a monument called the Maryland Waterman's Monument that's right there, again, on Kent Island. So, with restaurants and so forth, right on the water. This is the beginning of Kent Narrows. It's all got the name of Kent. So let's actually take a little tour around the bay and see what's going on. I just gave you a flavor of where we kept the boat, in Graysonville or on Kent Island. Now, as I said, we ran the boat from topside up in the bridge. So somebody's down below taking the picture as I'm steering the boat. Now, Kent Narrows is some of the area where I just showed you, and you have to go through what is called the Narrows between Kent Island, which is over here, and it's called an island because it's separated by that Narrows and over towards the Bay Bridge, okay? That is an island called Kent Island, and this area here to the right is now part of Maryland and sticks out into the waterway and connects with that Narrows onto Kent Island, okay? And there are bridges across here. As you see, the red line is a main bridge. and thoroughfare. When you go through here from the north side where our marina was, where we kept the boat, in order to get south, as opposed to other places in the bay that you could reach by going in the other direction, when you want to go south, like to St. Michael's, you would go through the Narrows. And so I put some things up here. You have to worry about tide, because this is an estuary with salt water coming up from the bay. If the tide is up, the water wants to run up the Narrows into fresh water, okay? When the tide is going out, obviously, the water runs through there. Well, because of the narrow constriction, the water goes like crazy. So where do you think anybody fishermen here? Where do you think the fishermen park in their little boats? Right here at the mouth of the Narrows, because there's a lot of water movement there. Well, when you're coming through and the water's behind you, you have very little steerage. And so the people that are running with the water, with the tide, get the right of way. Any boat going up, in this case, if the water's coming down, have to give way until all the boats that are coming south go through the Narrows. So when you go between the pilings of the bridge, which are like this wide, maybe, and you have no steering and the water's going like crazy, you got to get your speed up to kind of coast through and let the water carry you down when the tide is really running, and without bouncing off the walls if you can. There's a drawbridge there, and you have to wait for that if you've got clearance to the water that's higher than the lowest part of the drawbridge. Then you have to wait for every half hour for the bridge to open and so forth. And so you have to circle up in this basin with other boats, all trying to hold it until you get the signal from the bridge going up that it's okay to go through. And then you cross your fingers, close your eyes, and hope that there's no fishermen on the other side of the boat, okay? Or other boat traffic that are making the mistake of trying to head north when you're heading south. And then you have to worry about clearances. And when we've gone through, when the tide is up, with that much clearance to the radar mast with the bridge. Only because the bridge tender said, now I've run hundreds of your boats through here, you can make it. And I had that much to spare. That's close enough. All right, moving right along, let's go to St. Michael's. I put a population number with some of these western or eastern shore towns because it shows you the size and the nature of that civilization on the eastern shore is totally different because it is small town USA, 1,200 people technically in St. Michael's, and it's been decreasing a little bit officially from one census to the next, so I just rounded it off to 1,200 to give you a measure of it. At any rate, the town that fooled the British, I ought to comment on that. In the old days, St. Michael's was a very big boat building mecca, if you will. And the British, during the War of 1812, found out about this, that we were building boats there. And so they came in close to St. Michael's and had their cannon all aimed in there. But there was a spy who found out about the British coming in, what their intent was. So they darkened all of the lights in the town, but they had some lanterns and things hung up in the trees behind the town. So all the cannon from the British guns bombarded way beyond St. Michael's, and St. Michael's was saved. And they bombed it all night long, and then the next day they had left. And then the townspeople looked out. The town is still here. We fooled the British. And so that's part of the lore of St. Michael's. And if you didn't know that, that's a little bit of lore. If you go into St. Michael's by boat, which we did when we went there, you'll have some scenery, and this is coming in on the Miles River. And of course you have to follow the channel, the markers that will come in. That's Parrot Point on the south side of it, and you'll see some boats there. There's a maritime museum, nice museum. And one of the things they have on display is an old-fashioned lighthouse. Now, most lighthouses have been retired in the Chesapeake because of GPS and all the other navigation aids. So this lighthouse was taken out of the Chesapeake and put on land on display so that you can actually go up topside and see how people lived when you decided to become a lighthouse keeper. There are boat shops there with a lot of boat building and repairs, restoration. This one was a classic because I thought they basically got to take the keel and put everything above it brand new because this was so rotted out. But it does have an old history to it, which I won't go into, but there is boat restoration done down there. There is a bell tower. This is all in the same little area that once you get into St. Michael's, you can walk through and see. This is what a Chesapeake retriever looks like. And this is what some big guns look like. Sorry about the pun. Yes, I have changed. You think? There's a good restaurant there, several good restaurants as a matter of fact. Old houses. And if you wanted to go first class and pay the big bucks for a hotel, you can stay at the Harbor Inn. And this is the marina that we would tie up at. And that area right where the marina is Mulberry Street, and there are Mulberry restaurants here. Try to get in on a Saturday night. And then out on the street, you know, just a block away from the marina area itself, out on the street, if you drove down, since I assume you're not going to take a boat down here, if you drive down into St. Michael's, the little town itself is walkable. You don't have to walk very far in the center of town where all the shops are. If you like key lime pie, there's a key lime cafe for those. Okay, so if you then come back to the marina area where I showed you some of these buildings, this is one of the cannons, and you'll find, you know, a map of the water line and so forth, and what's going on there. So the next shot shows my two sons taking over the boat while I took photographs, and we're heading up the Chester River. And I'll show you a map here. The Chester River, sorry, my pointer doesn't work on this screen. The Chester River comes from here, winds its way up to Chestertown. So we'll talk about Chestertown. Pretty little town, 18th century. They had a boatyard that was active back a few years ago, and they were building a boat replica of the Sultana. That Sultana goes back to James Cook days, James Smith, sorry about that. And that boat was being built there, and I had a chance to walk in there and take this picture while they were building it. And I'll show you a picture of the boat. Well, there it is. Every year they have a Memorial Day Tea Party similar to what they do up in Boston for the Boston Tea Party, which was happening about the same time in history down here. Chestertown has a lot of stuff going on, lots of parades. Any football players here? Okay, we're out in open water, and if anybody knows anything about right-of-ways, if you're under sail, what? You have the right-of-way, technically, right? Especially if you're running with the wind and don't have the ability to tack. And this sailboat coming almost head-on to us is running with the wind. They get the spinnaker up, okay? And we're totally under control, as you can see, aiming right for them. Hopefully we dodge it, because I've got to get the picture and get control of the boat, I guess, whenever.
You gotta go behind them.
Okay, that's Chestertown, again, up here. Chestertown was up here where the dot is. And we're going over to Rock Hall. Rock Hall is this little dot right here. And that's kind of in open water. I didn't spend that time. This is an old town, as you might suspect. They talk about having the first road, and the road actually was in that area going to that point of land that comes down here because it's landlocked. And the reason for the road is because our government being over there in the neck of the woods called Washington DC, okay, when they would come over, and George Washington did it, and he actually slept there. When he would land at Rock Hall, they needed a road to get around in there, so that was technically the first road, certainly in this neck of the woods around the Chesapeake. Because it's out close to open water, it's what I call a sailing mecca because of the winds and wide open space of water. And they have fireworks down there and lots of other things going on. A lot of marinas around there, as you might suspect. This is one we stayed at for multiple rendezvous with many of the boaters. Summer celebrations are always going on. So they obviously don't have any traffic on the main streets. And there is a fall fest, and with tents and paintings and anything you wanted to buy, pretty much. This is an old house that they call a mainstay, which is a theater, and they have all donated furniture, some of which has got springs coming up, but it's kind of neat because it is going back in the past and participating in some of the things going on at Rock Hall in an Eastern Shore environment, so it's very casual, but they do have some very neat programs down there. If you're down over the weekend or on vacation, you'll probably have an opportunity to participate at the mainstay for some kind of a play or a music concert or some other such thing. And here's a waterfront in one of the activity weekends. The Coast Guard is typically present at events, and the thing I want you to notice is that, first of all, you can't see the engines, but you can't outrun them. Trust me. They also have a gun in case you do try to outrun them, okay? And so they can load that up and pretty much deflate anything that's ahead of them. I took this shot because there was a shucking contest going on. People are going like crazy trying to dig out the oysters because it was a prize and, you know, the champions were declared. This little kid came running in there and squirmed up, I guess, his mom's arms somehow underneath there, and I happened to be going by with my camera, and I snapped this shot. He's right smack in the middle of things. Okay. Music while you're walking through town and so forth. My two sons deciding what to order. Okay, now we're going to leave the eastern shore and go over to the western shore. Whole different ball game, okay? I call it the Key with a little pun in there because that is the Key Bridge that crosses on the outskirts of the routes that go around Baltimore up near Sparrows Point and the old Bethlehem Steel plants. That is the bridge. A lot of ship traffic going in and out because there's a lot of commercial stuff as you approach Baltimore Harbor. This is Fort Carroll, and incomplete, incidentally. And as you'll see, it was designed to have gun ports to protect the water going into Baltimore. 1848, so this is a result of the War of 1812, where the British, you know, came in and used the waterways to get to the major cities, and of course they torched a lot of it along the way, Washington DC being one of them. So they decided to build forts from Maine all the way down to Florida, along the coastal key places and towns. And in this particular case, can anybody tell me who the program manager was for this government project?
This is Grant. Grant.
Not Grant.
Robert E. Lee.
Who said that? Another guy passes the course. Robert E. Lee was out of West Point. One of his first challenges was to get this fort put together and built, and it was never finished. They ran out of funds because of government funding, of course. But a lot of people don't see that. You can cross the Key Bridge. It's down kind of under the bridge, and if you're looking for it as a passenger, you can see it down there. And that's what that is from the bridge way up high. It looks totally different. This is the view from the water, obviously, and looks a lot different than the average person would see.
people go out there?
Everybody sees Fort McHenry, and you can go visit that out of Baltimore. That's what that fort was supposed to protect. So once you get approaching Baltimore, there's a point down there called Fells Point, and that has some history. Baltimore is way bigger as a town, even though it's old. 621,000 roughly. That's different from, say, 1,200 people that you would find over on the eastern shore. So obviously Baltimore is a lot different, as is life over there. But it is a historic city. It's a major port, a lot of activity going on, and they have built and done a wonderful job with the inner harbor. And I'll show you a couple of pictures of those. As you approach, you get the smell of sugar as you go into the inner harbor, and it's Domino's sugar. And you approach downtown. I put this in here because my great-grandfather sailed on that ship when the Constellation was put into the Civil War at the beginning to go over to the Mediterranean and stop shipping and commerce with the Confederate States, which was going on all over the world. There were countries sympathetic to the cause, and that ship, the Constellation, was actually sent over and deployed in the Mediterranean for that purpose. And so, this is the below decks in the gun deck. And you can go down and pay a fee and go through the boat, see this old Constellation, a sister ship, if you will, to old Ironsides up in Boston, a similar vintage. This is our little munchkin who's about to pull a lanyard to do away with the aquarium over in Baltimore. Where is the little munchkin? Okay.
Still me.
I had to put that in there. On a beautiful day, the inner harbor has made this area of Baltimore really neat. There's tons of restaurants, lots of activities, the aquarium. It's a great place to visit. Paddle boats for anybody who wants to go out on the water. I was walking along the promenade, and this woman had two dogs in a regular carriage pushing along, and she had them dressed up as Harley, hats, glasses, the whole schmear. So I had to take a picture of those. If you go up in the Trade Center building, there is a observation tower at top where you can look around and see the whole inner harbor. As you can see here, there's the aquarium and pavilion and so forth, and a little bit of the.
Where's the ballpark in reference to that?
Over here.
Pretty far from the harbor?
I'll give you a shot of that shortly. Putting that guitar up there on top of that building must have been something. But again, as I say, there's so many things to do there, so many restaurants and other things. There's a lightship, again, on display. Another light that was brought in to display the way it was in the old days, that you can walk up and go around, as you see. Now you can go from one side, which is a long walk, if you come from the north side of the inner harbor and down to the promenade, you've got a pretty good walk to get over to some of the restaurants, Rusty Scupper and so forth. So there is a water taxi that'll take you to various places from the inner harbor down to Fells Point and so forth around the inner harbor area. So that's a good deal. There's a concert pavilion in case you wanted to have some noise. I took this in a wintertime shot because I had no clue what it was. But it is a memorial to the Polish support that we've received over the years, going way back to the Revolution and Civil War and World War I and II, of course. And it's dedicated to basically those Polish soldiers that were put into captivity by the Soviets at outbreak of World War II time period. And then Stalin had slaughtered all 35,000 Polish officers. And this is a memorial. And if you go back a couple of years ago, there was a plane crash that was going into Russia during a miserable storm, and it had a lot of diplomats, vice president, and so forth. They were over there for a memorial service for the Katyn massacre, finally getting the Russians to admit that they did it, because when the graves are uncovered by the Germans, they blamed the Russians and the Soviets said, no, the Germans have done it. So everybody was finger pointing. And it was only with a lot of help after World War II to discover how this thing really did unfold back in the beginning of World War II. And it was indeed the Russians that killed all those Polish officers to get rid of the threat of any uprising, because the Poles were pretty well organized from a military standpoint, overrun both by the Germans from the west and the Russians from the east, so they were caught in the middle, yo-yoing back and forth all during the World War II era. So that's an interesting memorial. There's a lot of scrolled engravings around the base of it, so something unique. If you go to Baltimore, it's right near the Marriott Hotel, right a block from the water on the inland waterway, right? The inner harbor, excuse me. Okay, then across the way is the Rusty Scupper, and this is a marina. It's an inner harbor marina, Marine Center. Now, on that side of the water is what is called Federal Hill. It was, you know, a high point, so controlled by both the British when they wanted control of that area in the War of 1812, and so that's ultimately it fell into our hands, but it's called Federal Hill. Restaurants galore in Baltimore, as we all know. There's a shot tower where they would take molten lead, drop down. By the time it hits, it's all in spherical form, cools off in the water below, and then they've got their shot. 1828. It's the birthplace of Poe, as we know. It's also Babe Ruth's home. If you drive around the little side streets, you can find all kinds of interesting things down in Baltimore. Now there's Camden Yards, which is kind of west of where we were at Inner Harbor, but walkable. Great ballpark. Come on. Don't tell me. New software is available from Apple.
Oh, no.
Try it.
Just quit that if it lets you. Okay.
Football stadium is not too far from there. Okay, now let's head south. This is a buddy of mine from Vermont, and occasionally they would come down. He's an old classmate, and he had this T-shirt. The beatings will continue until morale improves. The Bay Bridge, if you go from Annapolis and head east over to Kent Island and across the Chesapeake. So here we are stopping at Annapolis. Again, a different population than Baltimore, but 38,000, and compared to the eastern shore, again, 10 times what you'd find in a city on the eastern shore. A lot of history with Annapolis. It's the state capital. The Naval Academy is there, and they always have boat shows down there. And so there's a lot of activity from a water standpoint with boats. The Naval Academy is there with all their buildings, right? Accessible again from the water. Now you can drive down and walk through on land, but these are water shots. Admiral Halsey. Remember the main. That's the mast. Now there's a lot of history going on with what really happened as far as the main was concerned. I'm not going to go into that, but something you can research. It's there at Annapolis. And there's the Annapolis Harbor State House building over on the right. You can see the spire. This is City Dock. Goes right into the sea, right up into town. So you can walk when you're there. This is a statue of Alex Haley, who wrote Roots. And this little strip of water, if you can find a spot to tie up, is called Ego Alley. So that's our boat, as a matter of fact. There's the Capitol building. When I saw this picture that I had snapped of them sitting there, they've graduated and they're going off somewhere in deployment. And so I thought that's a neat picture to put in, because you never know what they're going to be doing next. Obviously, around the water in Annapolis, there are tons of marinas, places where people put their boats. In fact, if you look at all the boats in marinas that are not being used at that instant, you wonder, why does everybody have a boat? And then it just sits there. It's not being used out on the water. Go figure. There's another marina, that's the yacht club. Okay. This is a raft up. And a raft up just means that some poor sucker, some boat is designated the one to put the anchor down, and then the others tie up to that boat. Okay, so if you get too many boats and the current starts going and the wind is blowing and you're asleep at night or something, and the anchor starts to drag, you could be in deep yogurt. And we've all gone through that, I think. Anyway, this is a raft up here at the West River. That's our boat in the middle. Yes, I got nailed to be the guy that had the anchor down, and that was an interesting evening. Lime Mill is a little town with a lot of history, obviously from the 1600s, this particular mill. And I'm trying to think, it might have been operating, you know, up until recently, making grain and baked goods activity, but I'm not sure what its condition is right now. There was a big oak, and naturally when I went over to get the picture of it, they had taken the remainder of the tree down because it had been hit by lightning, devastated with a big storm, but it goes back to 1550. And if my memory serves me well, it was deemed to be the oldest oak tree in the country. So that's why it had its reputation. And they enclosed in a graveyard kind of environment with a fencing around it you can't get into. This is what was left of it when I took the picture. They were digging out the roots. There was one little sprout that they had put in there, kind of hardly a replacement. But there is a history plaque on the fencing around that white oak cemetery. Obviously, if you're going to be on the water, you've got to eat seafood. I threw that in there to get a laugh. Okay, happy hour. Interesting sail cover there at the visitor center, Cambridge. He didn't know I took this picture until months later, and I said, thanks a lot. You know. This is a marina that's south of Annapolis, a very nice marina on the western shore. And they had a beach. Most of the marinas, and they you know, they have a swimming pool and place to tie up your boat and so forth. But this place has a nice beach, a sandy beach, and a long breakwater. And they had these little Tahiti awning umbrellas. This is a shot, I believe, from the inner harbor, and we were down there for a weekend, and they had the boats kind of stacked in. And up on the boat, I saw this guy. He brought out a full bottle. It's a 2-quart, half-liter. And I came back an hour or two later, and he's still there. And I think the bottle was pretty much empty by the time I got through the afternoon.
There's no one anymore. She is again.
I'm telling you, she's got.
Will the person in the picture please stand up? You have to have 3 hands if you're going to sail under these conditions. I only had 2, so that meant only 1 hand on the wheel. This is my son's sailboat. Okay, we saw a picture, different shot of the Bay Bridge, obviously two structures from Annapolis over to Kent Island. And at Kent Narrows, which is that narrow strip I showed you up early in the presentation, there are 2 bridges. One is the high bridge that allows boats to go under okay, but then there's the drawbridge that we talked about, the little one over there. C&D Canal opened in 1829, so a lot of history on the bay, little towns like Chesapeake. And the canal connects, of course, if you needed to go to Cape May from inside the Chesapeake Bay by water, you would go up and through the canal and down the Delaware Bay.
Which bridge is that actually on the canal?
One of them.
Is it St. George's or?
Chesapeake City.
All right.
Well, I'm thinking that I'm heading, if I'm heading east and that's a north-south route, south down this way, but it could be in the other direction.
All right. I was just
Yeah, not sure what that route number is. I don't think that's coming in from, no, it isn't. Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Anyway, this is a different kind of bridge construction. A low-lying bridge over the chop tank. This bridge, of course, has a counterweight to it, all one piece here. That's at Nats Narrows. That's down kind of on the east side of the bay, well south of where most of these shots were. There's a key bridge we mentioned before that goes into Baltimore, or around Baltimore, excuse me. But if you go into Baltimore by water, this bridge is what you'd go under, and that is Baltimore that you're heading in towards. Now here's one of the lighthouses that we saw on land, both at the Maritime Park down at Rock Hall, as well as over in Inner Harbor. This is that kind of lighthouse, and it's a pretty famous lighthouse at Thomas Point that is still out there.
Is it still working?
It's not officially, I mean, people see it on a chart, and it's still there in a spot, but it is not manned anymore.
It's not lit?
Not lit. Now, if you're a captain on a big tanker or something coming up, you could see that over there visually, but you wouldn't be using it for maritime chart plotting and so forth. This is Turkey Point. This is the end of Elk Neck State Park. If you come down by land through Delaware and into the Elk River area, which is to the east of the Susquehanna River. There's a sandy point, and that's north of the Annapolis Bridge. That was sold off to the highest bidder. I mean, to get rid of them, they're not being used. If anybody wanted it, I don't know what they would do for a weekend to go spend on the lighthouse, but somebody bought it. This is another light down on the western shore in the southern part of the bay. So many different light structures, range markers. Again, that is a maritime aid that they would, zoom in on with radar and so forth, and that'll be on a chart. It's an official range marker. Channel markers have numbers and letters. Right on red returning, right? So as you go up the bay, you would have all your channel markers that are on the right-hand side telling you that don't go on the other side of them. They're all red, right on red, returning from the ocean, going up the river, or up the bay in this case. Now this, you would think, must be rocking away. This was a light that was built and built with cement concrete foundation into the bay floor, okay? And one winter time, it was very, very cold. They had a big ice jam that came in and moved that marker, that buoy, if you will. And it never regained stability upright because it's not floating, it's anchored. Now this one, I had a job hunting for this one, but I'd heard that it existed, but it only is in play during certain months of the summer or certain weeks of the summer. So I wrote it out. It's not too far from that little fort that Robert E. Lee was the program manager for, near the Key Bridge. If you come under the Key Bridge, go to the right of that little fort, this is where you'll find that key buoy. And that is supposed to commemorate the spot where Francis Scott Key decided to write what turned out to be the Star-Spangled Banner. Okay. All right, let's look at some of the houses down there. There's a two-story brick. These are just small summer places. Sailboat going by, no noise. And I found out from this big estate that that was just for the horses. Nice little beach, lots of lawn to mow, outhouses, big mansion, weekend retreat. Oh, we're going to look at some boats. All right, here's a traveler at work. Every now and then they do have some time off, and they all park in this little inlet near Kent Island, as a matter of fact. This was up the Sassafras River, and for a marina weekend, and I had my camera out, and these people came by in this little boat, right? Putt-putt, and they were waving, very jolly and everything else, and I looked at the picture after taking it, and they took off, and I thought, they got the life jacket on the dog. They didn't have any life jackets on. They're obviously overloaded. I mean, they got coolers, the motor, the two of them, and the dog, and everything else that you don't see in there. And I think, if this thing tips over and they go into the water, the dog's going to survive anyway. This is on Annapolis, at Eco Alley near the very end point of it. Chinese junk. When the sails are out on that, they're square rigged and kind of a pretty boat. Who's on that boat? Probably Chris, right? There's a friendly Coast Guard cruising inside Eagle Alley at Annapolis. See, you don't see these shots unless you're on the water. That is the boat that was being built in the workshop at Chestertown and out there on the water. And again, happenstance, if you happen to be going by, and there's the boat. So
Who's giving way?
and bet your dollars to donuts, the people on this boat probably don't have their life jackets on. They have no clue that that boat is behind them. Possibly.
But the little boat has to give way to the big one, obviously.
Well, unless you want to get run over, you've got to
I
get
mean,
out of
the
the way,
little
right?
boat, that's the rule, right? The little boat gives way
Well,
to the
it
bigger stuff.
depends, not necessarily. If you're both under sail, 'cause
They both were.
yeah, well, you don't know. The bigger boat might have had his motor on just to be
Oh.
under control a little bit more, in which
Oh,
case
yeah.
that may change. It depends on where the tide and the winds and who's overtaking the food, not other than the rules of the road.
By the time you figure that out, it's-
This guy here,
Really?
we're at a marina here. That's Federal Hill, so that's in a harbor at Baltimore. This guy, I don't know where he came from, might have come from the Mediterranean. All I could think of was Onassis, and something he might have. That is a very large sailboat. Now, you've perhaps heard of the Pride of Baltimore. The original Baltimore One was caught in a hurricane off England's shore. And so they built another replica, Baltimore Two, and I happened to catch that one. And as I snapped a picture, naturally, there's, you know, it's like a mosquito when you're trying to do something. The powerboat had to go zooming by, and because I'm going in that direction also, so the sailboat is going to be out of range or not in a great shot, but you take what you get. Okay, this one, this was a Swedish ship. He's coming over to a tall ship regatta up at Chestertown, I believe. And so you can see all of the various flags. I think that's Brazil, maybe where they've been and so forth. But they've got problems that they're trying to fix. There are a couple of guys up at the top end of this mast. And of course, they're in American waters, so there's a US flag on the stern. And they were anchored there trying to do something. Here we are underway. That's heading towards the Bay Bridge. And another guy who has a boat just like that one took this picture and sent it to me. Lots of different watercraft on the bay from all over. Woke up one morning at the Rock Hall Marina and went out getting coffee and walked down the dock, and here's this mutiny on the bounty. It had come in and it pulled up on the other side over there where that lighthouse on land, remember I showed you the Rock Hall exhibits, and that was one of the lighthouses on shore that you can look at, and that's the replica made for the mutiny on the bounty that your friend Marlon Brando played in. This is Eagle Alley over in Annapolis again. They give you a very tight spot because real estate is pricey, so they give you maybe that much between boats.
They walk from boat to boat. Oh, wow.
This was another shot in the inner harbor on a particular weekend. And this was a tall ship from Columbia that had come up. And of course you have to have a lot of manpower, people power, to handle sails and everything else. And you'll see on the yard arms their crew waiting for the captain to give the signal who's waiting to get the signal from the admiral that it's okay to wrap up the sails and, or drop them and get underway or something. There's a tugboat there, so I'm not sure what they were about to do. Thought that was kind of interesting. Big and little here. Maybe their next boat they were thinking of.
Shopping, window shopping. Wow.
I don't know why that was so blurry. The camera sometimes goofs up. Nothing to do with the taker. How would you like to have to tow that guy and hope the cable doesn't break in a high wind? And guess what happens when boats crash into the Bay Bridge Tunnel or other bridges that you hear about up and down the East Coast? It's because there's wind and tide and everything else that the poor captain is trying to figure out and get his boat through, and it's tight constriction. This boat always reminds me of a moray eel that's just waiting in the cavern while you go swimming by, because this is in the Chesapeake Bay, and he's waiting there for a distress signal of some sort. So they have a responder, it's called a Delaware responder, to go to a ship in trouble, whether it's down in the Chesapeake Bay or over in the Delaware Bay. This ship comes up from down south. That was a Japanese Coast Guard ship. I don't know what he was doing there. U.S. training ship, Navy. That was a new Coast Guard cutter. Balance of payments, right? Now, when you come across these things in a sailboat, you don't want to press the right-of-way issue, right? Now, I spotted, I don't know if it was this boat or not, on the Savannah River, coming up into downtown Savannah, because the Savannah River has a lot of commercial traffic. And this particular name was an auto carrier. And so, I mean, when that thing unloads its automobiles from its cargo, the cars just come streaming out, endless, forever and ever to unload this thing. And that one I happen to see up in Baltimore. So they're all over. Registered in Panama, right, because they don't charge very much money. It's like trailer trucks being registered in the state of Maine. The reason is the cheap registration costs, okay? So when you have a boat and you have to pay the government, somebody, in this case, you'd register the boat in Panama, Liberia is another place, and this is obviously a Chinese boat or an Asian boat of some sort, and we wonder why our balance of payments is high, but there we go. You have to keep your wits about when you're running in waters that have this kind of traffic on it, because you cannot hear that guy coming up. And if you're going along moseying and iPhoning or something like that and not paying attention, and you get out in the channel, this guy can run you right over and you will not hear it. I mean, it's a little bit like lightning. If you hear the thunder, you're okay. In this case, he's lightly loaded, so he's moving along at a pretty good clip without much noise. I thought it was kind of neat that this Red Cross ship was tied up next to a burned out warehouse building. He doesn't have any load in there. So, if you dare, you know, you cut across with your sailboat saying, I got the right of way, Wrong. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that there's an anchor down here. He's not moving. I'm not cutting in front of him, only to take the picture. Okay, going home. This is one of two, maybe three flyways in the US. This is the Atlantic flyway, and there's all kinds of species of birds. Of course, a lot of ducks and geese and so forth that come whipping down through the Chesapeake Bay area. And of course, that means great hunting.
You found it.
Can you find this guy?
He's in the window.
He's on the piling, yeah. I tried to make it easy and center the photo so. I'm up here in the flybridge of the boat, and he's down there just over the water, so. Sometimes when you're fishing and you're pulling in a good one and the gulls come down, eagles are around, more plentiful than ever. You know, there are a lot of storms in the summertime, winds and everything else. Why you would pick a tree unprotected in the middle of nowhere to build a nest on the highest point, the tree is going to go like this in the wind. But osprey are very tenacious. We got a couple more shots of them. I didn't realize this, but when I got home and saw that there were multiple markers here, I mean, I had to put a caption on, right? So. There's no nest building, no sticks, so they haven't made up their mind yet where they're going to build a nest. He's got to remember it in marker number 6. And evidently, they're both responsible for downsizing here because they're both there. The female is here. He's sitting over there watching, making sure everything is going well. Or it might be the other way around. Maybe that's her, and he's supposed to be rearranging the furniture. I don't know.
At least it's a sober house.
And I love this one. I mean, how often could you get a shot like that? And I'm going by and trying to run the boat and take pictures at the same time to get a shot like that with these two lovebirds cooing away. In a high wind and a lot of motion, because those buoys are going to be going like this. Talk about a precarious house with half the nest is falling apart over the edge. This is another raft up that's near Chestertown. Oh, wow. That was a sunrise, and it was another guy taking a picture of my boat anchored out there. But he got a lot of color, but not a lot of lighting from a camera standpoint. That's on the eastern shore, but north of Rock Hall. There's C&D Canal Bridge. I don't remember the name of this one or what route it's over. One of the restaurants on the water at Kent Island, again, there's plenty of restaurants to pick if you were to just drive down there and get some seafood, some crabs or whatever. There's a place called the Jetty, which is right there at Kent Narrows. And that particular evening, the moon was just shining out, coming in from the east. and that's Narrows. That's the end. Did you hear anything? Well, because we were 10 minutes late starting, I'm 7 minutes after 8. I know a lot of people want to go home and have a steak dinner and wine and everything else. But I'm here to answer questions if there are any. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Did you spend any time at Smith Island or Tangier Island?
At where?
Smith Island?
Smith Island,
Tangier?
I did not.
You've never been there?
Typically hung out mostly in that,
No.
I didn't quite get down to your area. Did go to rendezvous and outings that were further down than Smith Island, but I didn't get over there or to Tangier. So much area to cover in the bay and explore. Lots of little towns, and there's always something going on. Everybody's doing something every weekend. And I did not get everywhere. Yes.
I saw from your boat you live in Westchester.
Yes.
How'd you end up choosing the marina where you docked your boat?
Good question. We were looking to try to get in the middle of the bay. Went down to the Kent Island area. We're looking at a number of marinas there and happened to spot this one, or had talked to somebody about Castle Harbor. And one of the things that marinas do is they advertise in a lot of the water magazines, in this case Chesapeake probably. And I might have seen an ad and went over and investigated. And they did have a slip open, so I was able to get in there. So we got the slip before I even bought the boat.
Cool.
Now, it was a good thing it worked out that I got the boat that I wanted eventually, and we did bring it up. We had a marina slip waiting for us, but it turned out to be a nice choice. Well protected from bad weather, with the way they had the marina situated on the land, kind of a piece surrounded by condos. So winds and everything else that would crop up did not have a big impact on the water per se. The hurricanes that came up with the tidal surges and so forth raised cane, but that's going to happen to any marina. But this one was very, very well run. Had swimming pool, office and stuff like that, easy to get in and out of, and so convenient on the east side of the point of Kent Island that runs up, so that you could get into the Kent Narrows and go south fairly easy down to St. Michael's, or head north without being impeded to get to Rock Hall or Chester River. And then once you got a little bit beyond the point, you could go to Baltimore and down to Annapolis. So it was a very convenient spot. Plus they had a lot of restaurants. Good overall location. Anybody else? Well, thanks again for coming. Thank you for your attention.